Good afternoon, sir. Can you still see and hear us?
Yes, I can.
Mr. Steen, Mr. Maloney and Ms. Page have some questions. They estimate they will be no more than 15 minutes altogether, and they are going in that order, if that's all right, sir.
Of course, and I'm smiling only because of the flexibility of these timings.
So, thank you. Mr. Miller, I've got a few questions for you. My name is Sam Steen. I represent a large number of sub-postmasters and mistresses.
Sorry, your microphone's not on yet.
And the microphone is not on.
Sorry.
It is. Right, Mr. Miller, let me try that again. My name is Sam Steen. I represent a large number of sub-postmasters, mistresses, and indeed people that are employed within post office branches. Now, you said at the beginning of your evidence today, Mr. Miller, that you wanted to correct your statement, and you wanted to correct your statement regarding paragraph 51. Paragraph 51 of your statement, page 12, says you had no involvement with the design and implementation of the impact programme. And your correction was to say that you've seen documents that tell you that you are and were involved, as part of the impact programme. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Now, the impact programme was running in terms of design from 2003 and implementation came along in 2006, okay? All right. Now, do you recall that as part of the impact programme, the ability for sub-postmasters to put monies in suspense, in other words, into dispute, was removed?
Yes, I do, sorry.
Right. Now, did you understand at the time that the reason why sub-postmasters would be wanting to put money into suspense, in other words, into dispute, was because they were suggesting that they were not at fault for the shortfall? Did you understand that at the time?
I understood that in some cases, Mr. Steen.
Right.
Yes.
So why was it removed, Mr. Miller?
I think there was a overriding view in the business that they wanted to get an accounting system in that didn't allow for the effect of the suspense account previously.
Right. Are you trying to say that it was removed because you didn't want sub-postmasters and mistresses to dispute shortfalls?
No.
Right. Well, that's the effect of it, Mr. Miller. Try it again. Why was the suspense account removed?
Right. There was a view that previously the suspense account had been used for all sorts of things, and that in the future they wanted it a lot cleaner. But I'm not sure that the precise impact of what you are asking me about was fully comprehended.
Right. Was one of the all sorts of things that the suspense account was used for was to where the sub-postmaster was disputing their fault? Was that one of the things?
Yes.
Right. If you remove the suspense account, does that take away from the ability of a sub-postmaster to dispute the shortfall?
No, I don't think it did.
Right. What facility did they then have after the suspense account was removed to dispute?
There were discussions with the retail line and others about what was appropriate.
Right. If you accept that one of the reasons for putting money into suspense is because a sub-postmaster is disputing that shortfall, yes?
Yeah.
You accept that, which you do, and then you remove that ability, does that help the sub-postmaster dispute the shortfalls?
No, it doesn't.
Right. Now, think about this slightly further, and I'll move on. If a sub-postmaster is stopped from disputing shortfalls, what does that do to the reporting of system problems? Does it help it?
I'm not sure how it affects it. I'm sorry.
Well, as an example, does it stop the person saying, look, there's a problem with your system? Maybe do something about it. Do you think that helps it?
No, I would dispute that it stopped it there.
All right, let's move on. You say at paragraph 55 of your statement that Tony Marsh worked for the group security director with a dotted line to me, okay? Was there a dotted line from Tony Marsh, the group security director, to anyone else on the board?
No.
Right. So Tony Marsh reported to you. Is that correct?
Technically, he reported to the group security director, who did his appraisement every year, and within Post Office Limited, he had a dotted line to me.
Right. So did the group's security director report to you?
No.
Right. So why do you say there was a dotted line to me? What's the dotted line about?
It was an organisational effect that said, actually, Tony may work for group, but he has to have some anchorage in Post Office Limited, and will anchor him here.
Right. You've spoken about the coin report. Do you remember the questions being asked earlier on today by Miss Price? Yeah?
Yes.
And you've said about the coin report, this is in your evidence today, was that in relation to the expert's opinion, at the time, there was a lot of knocking of that report, both Fujitsu and Post Office. Okay? So your evidence seems to be that regarding the coin report, there was knocking of it by Fujitsu and Post Office. So let's take that in turn. What knocking of the coin report was there by Fujitsu?
I saw the inquiry question Jan Holmes, who is a senior auditor. There was a considerable discussion about his view of this report, and the discussion went to some lengths about what his view of it was and whether that was correct.
At the time, when you were dealing with the coin report and discussing it with Mr. Marsh, was there knocking from Post Office via Mr. Marsh about the coin report?
There was a background noise from my company, Post Office Limited, that was basically saying, this is not a good report. This is not a sound report.
Who did that background noise come from?
It came from a variety of places.
Well, name one.
Well, certainly when Tony spoke to me on the day that we have talked about earlier today, he was dismissive of that report. But there were, I suspect, back in the bowels, as it were, of the organisation, there was significant people saying, this is no good.
You suspect. Now, Mr. Miller, some part of your evidence, it appears as though you're speaking from a kind of a distance, like an out-of-body experience. What do you mean you suspect that there was some talk within Post Office about it? Was there or was there not?
Yes.
Right. From who?
I know, I heard from Tony Marsh. I really don't know who else was saying these things. I'm afraid I don't. I'm sorry.
Okay. You've also said this, both in your statement and in your evidence. You definitely did not read the report at the time. That's your evidence about it.
It is.
So are we to understand that you can think back to the time when you've got Mr. Marsh in front of you and he's referring to this report? Are you saying that you can say in your own mind, from your recollection, no, thanks, Mr. Marsh, I won't read it. It's okay, no problem.
No, I didn't say
Right.
that.
Why are you saying you definitely didn't read it? Do you remember not reading it?
When I read it, when it was made available to me for the second time via this inquiry, I had not read that.
So Mr. Marsh comes to you with a report that he's knocking, that you're hearing something going on in the background about from the Post Office knocking this report, and you decide not to read it. Is that what you're saying, Mr. Miller?
I didn't read it. I've made that very clear to this inquiry, that I didn't read it, and it's a matter of some regret to me.
Right. Mr. Miller, one of two things arise out of that. You're either lying through your teeth or you're a complete incompetent. Which?
I'm not lying through my teeth.
Right, so incompetence.
If you wish to say that, yes.
Or do you agree it's incompetence not to have read a report
I am
in
not,
these circumstances?
I am not happy that I didn't read that report.
Paragraph 16 of your statement, you referred to the fact, similar to paragraph 15, you refer to the fact that Pol would from time to time pursue postmasters for the recovery of alleged shortfall branch accounts, including through civil proceedings, yes? Regarding the coin report, you agree, I believe, that you signed off the settlement in relation to the matter that was under discussion. Is that right?
I did.
Yeah, okay. So, do you agree that you were the person in charge of the final decisions in relation to such matters as civil actions being taken against sub-postmasters at that time?
No.
Who else was Mr. Marsh going to then when discussing the coin report?
If Peter Corbett, the finance director, had not been on holiday, he would have gone to him. I mean, Peter, that was in Peter's line, and Peter was due to sign that off. He was on holiday.
Right. And Peter reported to?
The managing director.
Right. So on this particular occasion, on the only one occasion, when Mr. Marsh is coming to you because Mr. Corbett's away, you decide not to read a report that Mr. Marsh is referring to in disparaging terms, and you just sign it off. Is that correct?
I did.
Anything else? Oh, Mr. Miller, how much did you earn during your period of time? What was your annual wage?
That can be made available.
What was it, Mr.
I don't know.
Bonuses? Did you get bonuses?
I got bonuses.
Were they significant sums?
Somewhere.
That it, Mr. Steen? Yes. Mr. Maloney.
So I'm grateful for your observation on fluidity of time estimates. It's now 12 minutes past 2, and I anticipated that Mr. Steen was only going to be 5 minutes, but I'll try and be short and not keep too long. Mr. Miller, I've in fact been referred to during the course of your evidence this morning as somebody who asked you questions on the last time you attended. My name's Maloney. And it's agreed with Miss Price that it might be useful just to clear up any uncertainty about the evidence you gave when you first appeared before the inquiry, when I asked you questions. And so I'll just take just a minute on that, if I may, just to set the scene. When you gave evidence to the board in July 1999, you'd been aware of the cash account problems. Yes?
Yes.
You'd also been aware from the NFSP meeting in June 1999 of the postmaster's serious problems with Horizon, especially around balancing, that was affecting their physical and mental well-being.
I'm aware.
Yeah. But at the board, despite those difficulties, you were aware, of which you were aware, the minutes suggest that you said that Horizon was robust and fit for purpose.
I said that also, subsequently,
Yeah.
there was discussion, and that this didn't come out this morning, there was discussion of other issues related, and that is minuted in those board minutes.
Yeah. And after, and I asked, you said at the time that you couldn't remember saying that. That's what you said to Mr. Blake. And I asked you if you had any reason to doubt the accuracy of those minutes, and you said you didn't. And you clarified that you definitely did not say that Horizon was not fit for purpose and not robust. But you, later on after that meeting, found out about the Ernst & Young letter on audit integrity and various other matters. And you said that you should have looped around to the board, bypassing Mr. Sweetman, whose responsibility you thought it was to inform the board of those things.
I think there was some discussion of that. I can't recall saying precisely that, Mr. Maloney.
Okay. Today, in answer to questions from Miss Price, you said that on overall reflection, I should have told the lawyers in IT that Horizon was a new system coming in, and they should be very cautious about evidence coming out of that system.
That they should check the evidence coming out of that system.
Yeah. And then subsequent to the board meeting, we've seen this morning that you were involved in Mr. Andrews' case, Horizon outages, and you had some involvement in the Clevely's case. You were taken to the board minutes of December 2004, and you were tasked to ensure that Post Office could recover the pensions of fraudsters, yes?
I was tasked with
Yeah,
that.
you
I
were
made
tasked
some
with it.
comment on that, but
Yeah. Somebody else on the board had raised this, you say?
yes.
Yeah. Was this not an opportunity, given that those fraudsters were sub-postmasters, for you to raise your concerns that Horizon was a new system coming in and everybody should be very cautious about the evidence that came out of that system?
Had I known what I now know, the answer would be yes.
And finally, if I may, Mr. Miller, could I ask that the October board minutes that we've been to before, which are POL 30s 95506, are put up? And could we go to page 4, please? And we see there, if we could just, it's at 22, the NFSP subsidy, this may be sufficient. Reconsider the subsidy provided to the NFSP if they continue to undermine the position of Post Office Limited. And this is a board meeting at which you were present, and the specific action was to assess competing financial services products and to communicate that these would not be covered by our compliance and AML training, that's anti-money laundering training. The latter has been done via Focus Communications, and an article will be appearing in the Sub-Postmaster. A list of competing products is being compiled. Considering the continuation of the NFSP subsidy will be undertaken in the light of overall developments and information gathered covering products, e.g. including travel. Do you remember this issue at all, Mr. Miller?
I do.
Was this that there'd been an NFSP meeting where there'd been a stall at that meeting with a, as it were, a rival firm
That's
providing
correct.
services? Yeah. Was Post Office conscious that its subsidy of NFSP could be taken away if the NFSP undermined it?
Did it know it could do that?
Yeah.
I think so.
And was it conscious that this might be leverage with the NFSP?
I'm sure it was.
Yeah, which is why the specific action was to assess competing financial services products and to communicate, presumably to the NFSP, that these would not be covered by our compliance and AML training. Did you consider that consciousness of and what's being portrayed here was a healthy attitude from the business to an association which was supposed to represent the interests of postmasters?
No.
And presumably especially not those postmasters who were the subject of civil debt recovery proceedings.
No.
Nor indeed those past postmasters who were the subject of criminal proceedings and asset recovery to the extent of their pensions being taken.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Ms. Page.
Thank you, sir. Very briefly.
Mr. Miller, on the programme board for impact, you sat as what was called a senior user, didn't you?
Yes.
The programme was intended to, quotes, leverage and simplify the technology landscape. That means, in effect, that it was an extension of Horizon, doesn't it?
Or Horizon was an extension of it. Yes, it was part of the overall infrastructure.
So it was built into and onto and around the existing Horizon infrastructure, yes?
Yes.
Did you ever think to make sure that the people involved with it had read Jeremy Folks's document to you about the problems with Horizon and the things to look out for?
I didn't.
And why not?
I just didn't.
Is the
I'm
real
not saying I shouldn't have done, but I didn't.
Is the real issue here with some of the points that you have very fairly recognised you should have done or that you might have done differently. Is the real issue here that you and Post Office Board were keen to forget or deny the problems with Horizon as soon as you could?
No.
Thank you, sir. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Ms. Page. Is that it, Ms. Price?
Yes, it is, sir. If
Right.
you're content, sir, the plan would be to move directly to Mr Mills' evidence once Mr Miller is completed, subject to
Yeah.
any questions from you.
No, I've asked a few questions that I have as we've been going along. So thank you, Mr. Miller, for making yourself available, both by writing a second witness statement and by coming today for the second time. I'm grateful to you for participating in this way in the inquiry.
Thank you, sir.
Right, I'll just disappear from the screen momentarily, Ms. Price, while I get my hard copy of the next witness's evidence, all right?
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, sir. Can you see and hear us?
Yes,
Thank you. May I call Mr. Mills?
yes, of course.
Repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. You may sit.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. Please, could I ask you to state your full name?
David John Mills.
Thank you for giving evidence to the inquiry today. You should have in front of you a witness statement dated the 8th of March 2024 and running to 141 paragraphs. Do you have that?
I do.
For the record, the witness reference number is WITN 10950100. Before we turn to your signature, Mr. Mills, I understand there's one small correction you would like to make.
Yes, please.
It's at page 8 of the statement, paragraph 24. And it's in respect of the second sentence. Thereafter, the meetings occurred on a monthly basis until I left Post Office Limited in 2006.
Correct.
And what change would you like to make?
I would like it to read in 2005, please.
Thank you. As it says at paragraph 2 of your witness statement, you held the position at Post Office Limited until 31st of December 2005.
That's correct, Mr. Stevens.
Could I ask you, please, to turn to page 38 of the statement?
I have it.
Thank you. Is that your signature?
Yes, it is.
And subject to that one change, can you confirm that the statement is true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
It is.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. That now stands as your evidence in the inquiry. It will be published on the website shortly. I'm going to ask you a few questions about it.
Thank you.
You, as you've just said, you were the Chief Executive of Post Office Limited from 15th of April 2002 until the 31st of December 2005.
Correct.
And before then, you had a career in banking.
I did.
And am I right that your last role before Post Office Limited was as General Manager of Personal Banking for HSBC UK?
Correct.
Was that a board role?
No.
Had you held any board roles before Post Office Limited?
Many.
Had you held a managing director or CEO role?
Not in those words, no.
But a role akin to?
But in practice, yes.
Thank you. We don't need to turn it up. I want to look at the board you came to. In paragraph 52 of your witness statement, which is page 15, you say, as I note the above, when I joined Post Office Limited, there were irregular board meetings. On arrival at Post Office Limited, the board was therefore not exercising proper or effective oversight of any function. Could you explain why the board wasn't exercising oversight when you arrived at Post Office Limited?
The board wasn't functionally organised. It only had 4 directors. They met infrequently and not on a regular basis, and they dealt with matters that were of importance to Royal Mail Group. They were not into the detail of running the company.
You mentioned that there were 4 directors.
Yes.
The first was a chief executive, is that right? Or should I say, when you joined, you were appointed as chief executive?
Yes, but that's not one of the 4 directors. That was before my time, when I was trying to illustrate to you that the board was not, I didn't think, in control of Post Office Limited.
So what were the 4 directors' roles when you joined?
They didn't have specific roles in the sense that I created in the board that I subsequently made and managed. There was the chief executive of Royal Mail Group. There was the chief executive of Royal Mail. There was David Miller, the chief operating officer, and there was the finance director, Peter Corbett, and that was it.
If you do need some water, please.
Thank you, I'm grateful to you.
That was the board. Was there a separate executive management team that sat below that board?
Yes, eventually. As I say, when I got there, I didn't think there was a functioning board. So I went about establishing what I thought were the normal functions of a conventional board of a very large company. And I established roles, for example, IT director, for example, sales and marketing director. All of the normal functions that you would have expected existed in a normally large company. Those positions were held by members of the executive team. So we not only had board meetings, but we had executive team meetings. And for example, we had board meetings that met bi-monthly, we had executive team meetings that met monthly, and then all of the executives met every morning at 9 o'clock on a Monday. Sorry, not every morning. Met every Monday at 9 o'clock.
So you say in your statement that you saw building a proper board structure as an important matter.
Critical.
Was that something you took on yourself, or was it a direction given to you by someone else?
No, it was something that I felt was essential to running an extremely large company.
You referred to, in your evidence, making roles on the board for IT.
Yes.
Was that Alan Barry who fulfilled that role at the start?
It was, yes.
For sales and marketing, that was the other role you referred
Gordon Steele.
And in your evidence, you also refer to HR.
Correct.
And who fulfilled that?
John Main. And they were not appointed immediately as directors because Post Office Limited was insolvent. It was a crisis.
Yes, and is it fair to say that you saw your priority, your key priority, as bringing Post Office Limited back to solvency?
Well, I didn't realise that when I was appointed, but it didn't take me very long to realise that we had a burning ship. It was losing £1 million every single day it operated.
Can I ask, so we've looked at IT, sales, marketing, HR. You've referred to finance and operations already, operations being David Miller. Did you give consideration as to whether there should be other roles represented at the board?
Yes, we had, eventually we had a banking director, and we also had, gosh, now what else is it? I'm sorry, I can't recall what else it was, but there were 2 more roles.
We'll come to this in more detail in future, but when we're dealing at the start, or when you arrived, did you ever consider appointing something akin to a general counsel or head of legal for Post Office Limited?
Definitely not.
Why?
Well, those roles on the legal front were undertaken by the legal function of Royal Mail Group. We had really quite a strange arrangement in as much as a number of central functions of the Royal Mail Group were undertaken for and on behalf of Royal Mail and Post Office Limited. So in a sense, there was no need for a general counsel role for Post Office Limited because there was already one in existence at group level that one could draw upon.
Did you have any oversight of the Royal Mail legal department in your position as a director on the Royal Mail board?
No, none at all.
Did you, at the time, consider that to be problematic, where the legal function was dealt with by the central, parent body over which you didn't have oversight?
Yes, I did.
Did you communicate that concern to anyone?
It took a little time for it to dawn on me that I wasn't comfortable.
When did it dawn on you?
Oh, it probably took at least 6 months for it to dawn on me.
And what was the concern?
No, there wasn't a concern in the sense of the strength of the concern. It was merely a fact that I didn't have my own personal arms around these central functions and therefore could tell them directly what I wanted them to do, and therefore was in control of their pay and rations, and if they didn't like it, well, I could tell them what to do with their pay and rations.
We'll come back to that when looking at prosecutions in due course. Before I move on, I want to look at some other corporate structure issues. Michael Hodgkinson was appointed as an independent chair in 2003, is
Yes.
that right? Were you involved in his appointment?
No, not at all.
Were you satisfied that I'll rephrase that. What were your views on an independent chair being brought in?
But I was pleased.
Why?
Well, I think I probably hadn't realised quite how big Post Office Limited was when I took on the job, and I certainly hadn't realised the condition that it was in. And having someone as wise and as thoughtful and as experienced as Sir Mike on the board was just manna from heaven.
And in February 2005, Alan Cook was appointed as a non-executive director.
Yes.
Did you have any involvement in his appointment?
To the extent that I discussed it with Alan Layton, yes. I'd known Cook from NS&I days because I used to deal with him when I was with HSBC or Midland Bank. So I knew the man.
What were your views of his appointment?
I was pleased.
Why?
Well, he was another man who was experienced. He'd had a long time in the financial services industry. I wasn't surrounded by people who knew about that industry, and that's the direction that I thought was the solution to Post Office Limited's problems. He'd also had good experience dealing with government departments, so he was a good choice.
I want to look at your role as Chief Executive, please. Would you accept that as Chief Executive you had ultimate executive accountability for the operation of Post Office Limited?
Of course.
Would you agree that identifying, analysing and managing risk is an important part of running a company?
Definitely.
Is it fair to say that that goes to the heart of the role of the company executive?
Yes.
Do you accept that good risk management requires an executive to be proactive in identifying risks?
Yes, you can't just hope they come and jump up before you. You've got to go and find them.
And that applies to the chief executive as well as the people who report to him or her?
Of course.
Did Post Office Limited maintain risk registered when you joined the company?
No.
when did Post Office Limited start to maintain risk registers?
I'm not exactly sure, but the first thing that Sir Michael Hodgkinson did was to decide we needed a risk committee, and he established it and chaired it. And I thought to myself, well, that's jolly good, because we've got somebody now with good professional experience chairing the committee that needed to look at these things, and that's something that I can leave to Mike. I was very happy to do that whilst I got on with other things. I remember, I really would like to remind you that I was trying to deal with the biggest risk of all that this company faced. This company, without a question of doubt, faced going under. Now, that wasn't just a risk that affected all of the people within it, or with all the suppliers, or anything like that at all. Post offices were everywhere. There wasn't a village that they weren't in. So if post office had gone under, that would have been seriously deleterious for this country.
Yes, Mr Mills, it's in your witness statement, as you say, the serious risk that insolvency, the risk that faced Post Office Limited. Can I just clarify on the risk register point, please? Do you think that was introduced after Sir Michael Hodgkinson was appointed?
I think it would have been, but I'm sorry, I don't know.
How was risk and the risk management handled prior to a risk register being implemented?
I don't know.
When you joined as chief executive, what steps did you take to identify the risks that faced the business?
I'm sorry, I thought I'd made it clear. I didn't identify the risks on a one-by-one basis as you're discussing. My first priority was to try and set a course that stopped the company from going bankrupt. It took me at least 6 months to really understand what was going on. This was a very non-trivial company. I didn't have any briefing whatsoever about it. I had no papers, no people telling me what was going on. I had to try and discover all of these things myself. So I'm sorry, but I didn't go around trying to build a number of what are the risks.
Do you, in effect, then, in terms of the resources you had, that was fully occupied with looking at the solvency, and you didn't have the resources to deal with for example, a risk register? Is that your evidence?
It's sort of my answer. I mean, you're putting words into my mouth. I didn't have the brain power to cope with any more than I was coping with during those first 6 months. I'm very sorry, but I didn't.
Before I move on, can I ask if your remuneration was fixed or performance-based?
First of all, it was fixed, and then I recall that the Secretary of State made it extremely clear to Alan Layton that she expected the senior executive of the entire group to have remuneration that was performance-based, and that the targets for that performance should be stretching, and that the rewards for that stretching success were not to be miserly, they should be generous.
Do you recall? Sorry.
I eventually joined a thing called the LTIP, the Long-Term Improvement Plan, or something like that.
Do you recall how your performance was measured?
I do, yes. I had quite serious meetings with Alan Layton, who wanted to know what I'd done and when I'd done it.
And what specifically did he want to know you had done?
Turn the company into profit.
So it's profit-based targets?
No, I didn't say that. You asked me what specifically did he want to know, and I told you. He wanted to know whether I was going to get this company into profit.
Sorry, let me rephrase the question. In terms of how your performance was measured, was it measured by reference to how successful you were or your plan was to bring the company back to profit?
Well, one of the measurements was, did I create a strategic plan that held for the next 3 years and was approved by government? That would have been one of the things. But I really want to try and emphasise to you that the whole thing was about, can we save this place?
Mr Mills, in your evidence, you refer to that, you also say, we can bring this up actually, it's in the witness statement, page 4, paragraph 12, please.
Yes, I have it.
So just waiting for it to follow on the screen. Thank
Oh,
you.
I'm so sorry.
No need to apologise. You refer to, as well as the overriding objective to make the company profitable, I was also conscious of my other obligations as Chief Executive and as a Director of Post Office Limited. You go on to say, I was throughout conscious of my duty as a Director to ensure that the company was run in an honest, effective and ethical manner. And finally, you say, further, I understood that my duties were not only owed to existing shareholders, but also to the wider organisation, including Post Office Limited's employees, and to ensure it had a viable future. And that can come down, thank you. Are you... Postmasters aren't employees, are they?
Not in the conventional sense, but for the purpose of this inquiry, you could regard them as so.
Did you see your duty as a director to include considering how changes in management affected sub-postmasters?
Definitely. Yes, definitely.
One last question on corporate governance before I move on. Did you apply or take into account any codes of practice or codes that were relevant to corporate governance and management?
No, not in the sense that you mean. In the sense that you meant, was I following the normal corporate codes, for example, of the Companies Act 2006? What I was trying to do was follow the general ethical codes that I'd learned through 40 years being in one of the UK's biggest banks. And the ethical codes that were employed there were very, very strict indeed, and worked. And I was doing my best to employ many of the lessons that I'd learnt over that period in Post Office Limited. To have tried to cover them with regulatory work at the time that I was trying to do it would not have been possible. You would not have been able to change the organisation at the pace that needed.
Please, can I just clarify that? When you refer in your evidence a moment ago to ethical code that you learned or gained experience of over years, are you referring to a specific written ethical code or general experience that you picked up in running various companies?
Well, not just that. I was on a number of regulatory bodies, including the Personal Investment Authority. I was also on their arbitrary council and so forth. So I was very familiar with the way in which regulatory bodies handled large companies, admittedly all in the banking sector.
Yes, but when you use a specific word, ethical code, are you referring to a particular written document?
No, I'm not.
No, thank you. We'll turn then to looking at some issues relating to Horizon. Please could we bring up page 5 of the witness statement, paragraph 14. And this is picking up on a theme you mentioned earlier. You say, when I joined Post Office Limited, I was barely briefed on anything by anyone. Even the building security team was not expecting me on my first day. I arrived to an empty open plan office and began work. And at paragraph 15, you refer to the priority to, when you started Pol, after getting an understanding of the business, to formulate a strategic plan. You say also in your statement that you knew about the Horizon system, and you say that it was delivered quite some time before my arrival. who gave you any information? I'll rephrase that. Sorry. The information you had on Horizon, who gave that to you?
Miller.
David Miller.
Yes, David Miller.
And when did he give you that information?
Probably on my first day.
Did he, when speaking to you, did he refer to any of the difficulties that Post Office Limited had faced during the trial and rollout of Horizon?
No, mainly our conversations revolved around the fact that Horizon had been started as a way of automating the transactions of, gosh, who the devil was it? I'm sorry, it's called old age.
The Benefits Agency.
The Benefits Agency, I'm very sorry, do forgive me,
No need to
Chairman.
apologise.
So they'd gone a long way with automating what the Benefits Agency wanted, and then eventually the Benefits Agency said, no, we don't want all that. It's all costing too much. We can do these things differently, and we're pulling out. So that left the Post Office with a major decision. Did they take this system and try and amend it, or did they write it off? If they'd have written it off, it would have been a massive write-off for the government, just a huge hit on the bottom line of a company that was already insolvent. So they decided that they would refurbish this thing and try and use it to, unbelievably, automate the entire back office of the Post Office, all in one go. Well, that was what I knew about Horizon.
Please can we bring up your witness statement, page 26, please, paragraph 91. Actually, that's great, thank you. If we can have 90 and 91 together, please. Thank you. Similar to what you said, you refer at the end of 90 to the system being repurposed in a way to automate the entire back office of the branch network. And you say, with hindsight, Horizon should not have been repurposed in that way. It's become evident that it was not fit for purpose. At the time, were you given any impression or any understanding that the repurposing of the system had a negative effect on the actual end product?
No one had specifically mentioned it, but I would easily have expected it. I had been the IT director of Midland Bank, and we had rewritten the entire retail banking systems for the bank. And there was only one way to do that. It was not to try and remake the elephant all in one go. It was to bite it in tiny pieces.
Were you sceptical then of the as you describe it, the repurposing of?
Definitely.
Did you do anything on the? Did you do anything because of your scepticism?
Yes.
What did you do?
Well, it was pretty obvious that Horizon was not going to be written off, nor was it going to be closed down. No one would have accepted that in government or indeed in the wider surroundings. So I made it very clear very early on that we had to do a number of things with Horizon. The first thing was to reduce its cost, because remember, my primary activity was to try and keep this thing afloat. So we needed to reduce its cost to something like you would normally expect a company to be paying for its IT. Now, we were paying well above what you could have expected. Normally that would have been 15% of non-interest expenditure. It's sort of a rule of thumb sort of thing. So I basically said we must reduce the costs of Horizon. And at the same time, we must begin to think now about how are we going to replace it within the contractual term, which was basically 5 years hence. And that's the amount of time you really need to think about how you replace a system of this size and scope and complexity.
Did you at any point think that you needed to investigate how robust or how adequate the system was in recording transaction data?
No, not at the transaction data level. I thought very early on that I needed to understand what was happening to this system in the hands of the user. So it was not at all unusual for me to go out and directly visit sub-postmasters who were using the system, to ask them how they were getting on with it, what were the problems with it, what were the good things about it, how were things happening in their branch. And that was I did that regularly. And we also set up a model office, because very often, even with a very well-performing IT system, you can create a model environment and examine it forensically to see how it's working, what we can do to improve it. You know, if the glass of water is over there, that's too far to reach. We want the glass of water here. So many, many tiny things can be done to make a performing system perform much better.
Why did your scepticism not include how it recorded transaction data? Sorry, how the Horizon IT system recorded transaction data?
I don't know. Maybe it's because in those days this is very early days for computers in the scheme of things. And in those days, most people thought that computers did work and that they produced an answer that was logical and reasonable and would do the finished job. Also, don't forget that this thing had been run, it had been piloted, it had been acceptance tested. So it had gone through many stages before I was there. It had been live for 2 years before I arrived.
Did you ask anyone about how the rollout, the testing, the pilot went, and how Post Office Limited, how satisfied it was with the rollout, testing and pilot?
Yes, of course I did. I just said I was talking to sub-postmasters on a regular basis, a very regular basis.
So that was with sub-postmasters?
Yes.
What about anyone in the Post Office IT department?
No, I didn't actually, because in a sense we didn't have an IT department. We had Fujitsu. That was the IT department in reality.
What about Alan Barry?
Yes, he was the IT director, but he didn't have a load of code writers behind him. And of course I did ask him, obviously, how things were going and what was happening.
Did you feel that you had sufficient IT expertise within Post Office Limited to properly understand whether Horizon was adequate?
No.
Why did you not try to address that?
I did.
How?
Recruiting Rick Francis, for example, who was the IT director who succeeded Alan Barry.
And in all of this, when you're talking about asking questions about the pilot and the testing, etc., you may have covered this in your evidence already, but just to be sure, did you discuss that with David Miller?
Yes. Yeah, Miller is a crucial man in this. He is very thoughtful. He worked extremely hard. He was running the network, and he was running the network with aplomb, in my view, given the things that we were trying to do.
Please could we bring up your witness statement, page 34, paragraph 124. You say that I've been asked whether I was concerned by the nature or frequency of allegations made by sub-postmasters that Horizon was defective. To be clear, whilst at Post Office Limited, I was not aware of complaints to the effect that Horizon was compromised. I can come down, thank you. Can we also now bring up POL 20328-107? This is a letter from Dave Barrett of Post Office Limited. It's dated the 29th of October 2003. Dave Barrett's job title was Head of Commercial Urban Area Wales, the Marshes and Merseyside. Did you know who Dave Barrett was?
No.
As you'll see, it refers to a letter about Alan Bates sent by Betty Williams MP. And in the second paragraph, it refers to Post Office terminating Mr Bates' contract because of a loss of confidence in his willingness to conduct the job in the manner expected. Were you aware of Alan Bates at around this time?
No, not at all.
If you turn to page 4, please. This is a letter from Betty Williams MP to Stephen Timms MP, who was Minister of State for E-Commerce, Energy and Postal Services. Do you remember Mr Timms MP?
I remember Stephen very well indeed.
And he was the Minister at the Department for Trade and Industry when you were Managing Director.
Yes, an excellent man.
You will see in that letter, Betty Williams MP, if we go down, thank you, refers to a conversation she'd had with Mr Barrett, and says his attitude was wholly unacceptable. Sorry, his arrogant attitude was wholly unacceptable. And her complaint, well, she asked Mr Timms to make a complaint to Alan Layton regarding the matter. If we turn to page 7, please. This is Stephen Timms' letter in reply to Betty Williams on the 17th of November 2003. At the bottom, it says, however, in view of your concerns, I have passed your correspondence to David Mills, the Chief Executive of Post Office Limited, and have asked him to investigate the matter and respond to you direct. And over the page, we see Mr Timms' letter to you. Do you recall receiving this letter?
I don't, but I'm not at all surprised that Stephen sent it to me. I like Stephen a lot. We got on very well. He worked extremely hard to do his job, and I would have done anything I could to have helped him.
Would you have expected a letter from the Minister responsible for the Post Office to be put onto your desk?
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that I'm not at all surprised that Stephen wrote to me.
Well, I'll ask you, so would you expect a letter sent by the Minister responsible for the Post Office?
Yeah, yes, I would have done, yes.
Do you think, you say you can't recall it, do you think on balance it's likely you would have received this?
I probably did, yes. And probably I'd have taken the wrong thing out of it. I would have been probably incensed that one of our area managers, Barrett, whatever his name was, had been rude and arrogant and so forth to Betty Williams. And if you look at her note, she's got a handwritten note, you can see that it does seem that this chap was not good with her. And so I'd have probably progressed that rather than Mr Bates, which I'm not saying is right at all. I'm saying that's what I think I might have done.
But it's apparent you can't actually remember what you did.
No, I'm sorry, I can't.
No. Please, could we turn to page 9 of the same document? Thank you. This is a letter on the 11th of November 2003, again to Betty Williams MP, this time from Alan Bates. So the 11th of November, just before Stephen Timms' letter to you. In the 4th paragraph down, it says the comments made in his letter about lost confidence, that's referring back to the termination reason, etc., is really just a smokescreen to try to justify their actions from their position. The real truth behind all this are the problems with the Post Office Horizon system and the lengths that Post Office will go to keep it covered up. In the next paragraph down, it says, with regard to the response you received from the Minister, I can see that Post Office is using its contractual issue ploy with him again, but it really needs to look into the Horizon issues. It is Horizon which is in one way or another is causing the problems. And then over the page, please. The second paragraph down says, Post Office Limited are terrified about the real facts with Horizon being known, and it seems they will stop at nothing to keep them hidden. If we move on to page 11, please. It's a letter from Betty Williams to Stephen Timms on the 19th of November, enclosing the letter we've just referred to by Mr. Bates. And then finally, please, if we can go to page 12. Mr. Timms' response on the 8th of January. At the bottom of the second paragraph, he says, however, in view of the concerns raised by Mr. Bates as to the validity and reliability of Post Office Limited's Horizon computer system, which he sees as a factor in his dispute, I have had my officials contact the company to receive their response to the issues raised. Goes on to discuss Horizon, but then says, I understand that the management of Post Office Limited do not share Mr. Bates' concerns and are fully confident as to the reliability of the Horizon system. Goes on to say they have found no evidence to suggest there is any fault with the Horizon system and maintain that decision to terminate Mr. Bates' contract was legitimate. Do you recall being made aware of these concerns by Mr. Bates?
No.
Given the relation or the working relationship you had with Mr. Timms at the time, is it likely that you would have been made aware of those concerns?
No, I don't see the connection with your question.
Well, earlier in your evidence, you said you worked closely with Mr. You had a good.
Yes, but I'm sorry, you're trying to connect that with people giving me evidence that was something wrong with Horizon, which I didn't have.
Okay, let's take it in stages, Mr. Mills. Firstly, based on your working relationship with Mr. Timms, do you think you would have discussed the concerns raised by Alan Bates with him?
No, because I wasn't aware of those concerns.
So, is your evidence, or what you think happened, Mr. Timms raised it with the company, but raised it with someone else?
I think so, looking at this correspondence.
Who else in the company would be responsible for dealing with requests such as this from Department of Trade and Industry?
I'm not sure. It depends to where it was addressed, but if it was something of an IT type, it would have been Alan Barry.
So is your evidence that Alan Barry would have had a direct line of report to the Department of Trade and Industry?
No, I didn't say that.
So who then...
I don't know is the answer to your question.
How often did you meet with Mr. Timms around this time?
No, I didn't meet with him regularly. I spoke on the telephone.
How often did you speak with him on the telephone?
Oh, infrequently.
When you say infrequently?
3 or 4.
3 or 4, what? Is that times a month or...?
No, in total.
In total?
Yes.
3 or 4 times. Over how long of a period?
The length of the time that I was with the post office.
Could we move on, please? Actually, sir, this is probably a good time to take a short break because it's moving to a different topic.
Certainly. Do you want a 10-minute break, a 15?
I think 10 minutes will be fine, sir. Thank you. If we could say 20 past.
All right. Fine. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, sir. Can you still see and hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to move to the case of Clevely's, please, and start with Poll 00158493. This is an email from Keith Baines. It says to David J. Mills. That's you, isn't it?
Yes, that's me.
And Keith Baines is noted as a contract manager at Post Office Limited in the IT Directorate. Do you recall working with Keith Baines?
No, but I know who he is. He negotiated a lot with Fujitsu.
The subject is action from your visit to the IT commercial team meeting.
Yes.
What was the IT commercial team meeting?
Well, it was just a visit to the IT, so I knew, or get a feel for the people working there and ask them probably inane questions, but helped me to learn more about the business.
And it says, David, you asked who in Post Office was instructing the lawyers in the case referred to in the following risk on the IT risk register. Pausing there, do you remember what the IT risk register was?
Yes.
What was it?
It was just a register of those risks that the IT thought may affect them and or the company.
And who had access to the IT risk register?
I'm sorry, I don't know.
Who was responsible for putting risks on the IT risk register onto the Post Office Limited Board's risk register?
Well, ultimately, it would be Alan Barry and or Rick Francis subsequently.
But if you were aware of a risk on the IT risk register, presumably you would accept responsibility for putting that onto the main board's risk register as well.
Yes, I would, but I wouldn't have done in this case because I was just on a walk around and noticed this particular risk, which I asked about.
So the risk says there, damage to reputation of Post Office and potential future financial losses if Post Office loses court case relating to reliability of Horizon accounting data at Clevely's branch office. What did that mean to you at the time when you read it?
Well, actually, that meant nothing to me at the time. What did catch my eye was that the potential financial loss was £1 million.
It was £1 million?
Yes.
Well, looking...
So naturally, I said to this fellow Baines, you know, let me know about that, please. I want to know more about it.
Taking it in stages from what that says and what it is, firstly, someone's brought a court case against Post Office Limited. Yes?
Yes.
And part of that court case concerns the reliability of the Horizon accounting data. Yes?
Yes. Yes.
And the IT department had considered that to be a risk worthy of going on the IT risk register.
Correct.
So the risk related to IT and not, for example, just a general legal risk.
No, everyone was supposed to be identifying their own risk. This was an IT risk.
And it says there's damage to reputation of Post Office and future financial losses. What did you understand the future financial losses to be?
£1 million.
But what from the saying that the amount is in £1 million. How did you understand the Post Office risked losing £1 million?
I didn't know. I didn't understand that. I saw a risk register. It was registering a figure of £1 million. Anyone with any brains would have said, I need to know more about this.
There's sufficient information there, isn't there, to see that someone was putting the reliability of Horizon into issue in court proceedings?
Yes, there is.
Did that concern you?
No, because I asked about it to find out about it. So I just reading that I wouldn't even have taken that in when I read it. What I would have taken in is £1 million.
when you asked about it, what were you told?
This is the response.
Ah, sorry. So if that can come back up, sorry. We'll wait for that to come back up.
While Mr. Stevens is waiting for that to be put back up, the £1 million that you mentioned, Mr. Mills, actually it's the first time I think I've heard that figure. Was that something written on the risk register, or was that something you learnt from another source?
No, I think it was written on the risk registers.
Right.
So we can assist with that. I'll go to it in a moment once we're finished on the document. Thank you. So I asked what question you raised about this, and you said this is the response.
Yeah, correct.
This still doesn't tell you what the challenge to the reliability of the IT system was, does it?
Correct. It does not.
Did you ask what that was?
No.
Why not?
I wasn't that clever. I'm sorry, I didn't ask about it.
Well, let's look at, if we look to the next paragraph, it describes who's providing instructions. It says the case is scheduled for the week commencing 16th of August, and we have offered settlement and paid money into court based on what the postmistress would have received for 3 months' notice.
Correct.
Did it not concern you that an offer of settlement had been made in a case where the reliability of the Horizon IT system was an issue?
No, because I hadn't properly assimilated the fact that the reliability of Horizon was in doubt. I hadn't got that in my mind. What I'd got in my mind was £1 million, and looking at this email, it looked pretty certain to me that we were going to settle for 3 months' notice. And at the level that I was operating at, that seemed an end to that issue.
Let's look at the risk register then, please. This is an Excel document. It's POL 20120833. And if we could open the Risk Ops P5 tab. Thank you. So we see at the top, Director at IT, Commercial, and then Alan Barry, so that's the IT Director who reported to you. The same risk is in the first line, it's in the description, and the risk is set at £1 million. Action, Royal Mail Legal Services have made an offer for out-of-court settlement of the case, review with Fujitsu of their processes to protect against similar future cases. Did you not want to know what this review with Fujitsu entailed?
No, because I haven't read this risk register. This is the first time I've seen this, other than this may have been what I saw on my walk around.
Yes, I was going to say...
But I don't know that it was, because this isn't in my mind. And looking at it, you can see why it probably wouldn't have been. If I'd have been going around looking at desks and looking at risk registers and looking at this, and I'd have looked at the first line and it said risk £1 million, well, I'd have probably put that in my little notebook and said, tell me about that.
When it says risk £1 million for potential future financial losses in the description, were you not concerned that the future financial losses may be connected to the criticisms of the Horizon IT system and how it stored data?
No, because I hadn't spotted the criticisms of the Horizon IT system. What I'd spotted was £1 million.
Do you think you should have spotted the criticism?
No, I don't.
Why not?
If I'd have concentrated on any issue at that level, I'd have never, ever got anywhere near to turning the post office round. This was for Alan Barry to deal with, not me.
Alan Barry, as you say, is the IT director, but you accepted earlier that ultimate executive accountability for the Post Office Limited lay with you.
Of course.
The Horizon IT system was a system that put together, recorded transaction data held by branches, yes?
Yes.
And from that data, Post Office Limited used that data, to put together its management and statutory accounts, correct?
Yes.
It was important that the data was reliable, correct?
Yes.
And you knew all of that at the time.
Of course.
I ask again, do you think when you saw a risk register that referred to a challenge to the integrity of Horizon, that you should have asked more questions as to what that challenge, the challenge to the integrity was?
I think I've said this already, but I think I said to you that I hadn't assimilated that point. The point that I had assimilated is £1 million. Now, whether I should have followed up on things that I hadn't assimilated, I think is really hypothetical.
I'll move on from that risk register to something related. Could we go to WITN 00? Actually, no, sorry, before we go there. Please, can we go to POL 001 42503? This is an email from Rod Ismay. Do you remember working with him?
No. I know the name, I know the man to look at, especially because I've been reminded on the occasions that he's reported here.
And we've heard evidence this morning that Donna Parker was David Miller's personal assistant.
Correct.
Do you recognise the other names, Mandy Talbot, Carol King or Tony Marsh?
Yes, I recognise all the names. I don't know the people. Obviously, I know Marsh. I don't know Mandy Talbot. I don't know Carol King, but I've seen a lot of their work in this inquiry.
This is again talking about the case of Clevely's, and Mr. Ismay sends on correspondence regarding the case, including counsel's opinion. Goes on to say, in summary, we suspended Mrs. Wolstenholme in 2001 after apparent discrepancies in her cash accounts. We claimed for the value of these losses, and she counterclaimed for loss of earnings. Within her claim was an expert's opinion which was unfavourable concerning Horizon and Fujitsu. It goes on to say about lodging payments into court. We heard this morning evidence from David Miller about him approving the settlement. Did you ever hear about that this case had settled?
No, I didn't.
Can you explain why a settlement of this case wasn't discussed at the board or executive team level?
Yes, Miller had delegated authority.
Was this not, the email here in Mr. Miller's evidence was that this would have been dealt with by Peter Corbett usually?
Correct.
And it went to Mr. Miller in his absence?
Correct.
So is it your evidence that if either of them had any concerns, it was for them to raise at the board?
Probably at risk committee, first of all, pre-board.
Could we please turn to WITN 00210101?
Before you go there,
sorry.
When I was just checking what it was you were putting up. Don't worry. I was simply going to ask Mr. Mills whether he thinks that, regardless of whether either Mr. Corbett or Mr. Miller had delegated authority to settle, the fact that there was an adverse expert's report about Horizon should have been taken to the risk committee?
Yes, I think it should have been, Chairman.
Right, thank you. Sorry, Mr. Stevens, carry on.
No, sir, and on we can actually look at that report now. If I could bring that up, it's WITN 00210101. This is Mr. Coyne's report in the case of Post Office and Julie Wolstenholme. Could we please turn the page? I'm not going to read it all out, but if we can go down to the bottom half of the page, please. It refers to penultimate paragraph. The majority of the system issues were screen locks, freezers and blue screen errors, which are clearly not a fault of Mrs. Wolstenholme's making, but are most probably due to a faulty computer hardware, software, interfaces or power. In fact, on a detailed view of call 11021413, dated 2nd November 2000, Ms. Tagg may have witnessed firsthand the style of system problems that Mrs. Wolstenholme experienced in her operation of the system. And if we could turn to page 4, please. It says, in summary, from a computer system installation perspective, it is my opinion that the technology installed at the Clevely sub-post office was clearly defective in elements of its hardware, software, or interfaces. I understand your evidence to be that you've never seen this report before. Well, sorry, I'll rephrase. Until the inquiry sent to you, you've never seen it.
No, I haven't seen this report at all.
If this report had been put before the board or on the risk register, what would you have done?
I'm not entirely sure because I've only seen 3 paragraphs of summary and 1 paragraph that you highlighted. So I'd need to read the whole thing in detail and with some time to assimilate it in my mind before deciding what I would have done with it.
Mr. Mills, this document was sent to you in advance of this hearing. Have you not had a chance to read it?
I'm sorry, if it was, I would have read it. I can assure you of that. And I might well have forgotten the fact that I've read it.
Let me ask you this. If you received, as a hypothetical, if you received a report from a joint expert that raised a concern that there was a reliability issue in Horizon, what would you have done?
I would immediately have taken it down to Alan Barry and said, let's talk to me about this, please.
So you would have gone to your IT director and taken his advice, effectively?
No, not necessarily taken his advice. This is occurring in Peter Corbett's area, and Miller knows something about it, so I would have started off with Barry.
What would you have done then?
Well, I don't know. It depends what Barry had said to me about it. I just don't know the answer to that.
One element of this I want to explore, and it's we saw it earlier. There's Post Office Limited, or someone from Post Office Limited giving instructions with legal advice coming from Royal Mail. In your witness statement, we don't need to have it on the screen, but it's page 15, paragraph 48. You say, with hindsight, the legal function should have been reporting to me on matters related to POL, so that I could, matters related to Post Office Limited, so that I could exercise oversight of it. When you say with hindsight, is this an area where you feel you would have been better served by having legal in-house or in Post Office Limited? Definitely. And why do you say that with hindsight?
Well, because I'm now looking back at what's occurred during the many years, even when I was there, let alone when I left. you can see that things were dropping through the slats. And I'd have hoped that I'd have helped not let that happen.
To what extent do you think it was a failing for Post Office Limited not to have a legal function on its board?
I don't think it was a failing at all.
Why?
Well, perhaps I should remind you that I didn't retire from Royal Mail, I resigned. And I resigned on matters of importance.
And what were those matters of importance?
I disagreed with some of the policies that were going to be adopted by Royal Mail Group.
Was one of those policies relating to where the legal function sat?
No, it wasn't.
So, going back to what we were discussing, the issue of whether it was a failing for Post Office Limited not to have a legal function on it, why do you say it wasn't a failing?
Well, because you have to be in the moment. It's very easy to look back and say, well, it's obvious that you should have had a legal function. We did have a legal function. It was operated centrally by Royal Mail Group. Everyone had got used to the fact that Royal Mail Group provided certain functions from its centre because it seemed to be more economical to have those functions in a mass so that you could have the very best people all in together. And of course they were in a different location as well. So looking back, you can say to yourself, well, that looked all right at the time. But now I look back and I can say, no, it wasn't all right at the time. It would have been better if it had reported within Post Office Limited.
Please, we bring up poll 3072892. This is a letter dated 6th of December 2004 from Lee Castleton. It's addressed to a Mr. Knight, but if we can go to the bottom, please. We see that it says copy to David Mills. Again, it won't highlight all the letter. It has been, in fact, it's exhibited to your statement. In the second paragraph, as part of Mr. Castleton's explanation of the problems he was facing with Horizon and his subsequent suspension and termination, he says in the third line down, we explained we felt there must be something wrong with the computer system as we had looked through our paperwork repeatedly but could not find anything wrong. In the final paragraph, again refers to computer failure, third line down. All the paperwork that is required to prove the computer failure has been removed from this office for investigation. So now, having no paperwork to prove my innocence, I do not know how to move forward. Were you aware of this letter?
Yes.
At the time?
No, I don't think I was aware of it at the time. I am now.
How was correspondence such as this handled on your behalf in your office?
I had a secretary who would normally stamp it in, so I'd got a date stamp on what was received. And if it was obvious where it was going to lie, she would pass it out to whoever was going to deal with it. So if it was Corbett, if it was whoever.
So your voice trailed off at the end of it?
I'm sorry. If it was obvious where it was going to be dealt with, she would pass it out to that entity before I received it.
Would you have expected a letter like that to be raised with you?
Yes.
But I take it from your evidence you can't recollect any dealings with Mr. Castleton's case?
No, I don't.
Mr. Castleton was involved in litigation brought by Post Office Were you aware of that litigation when you were in post?
No.
Please could we bring up POL 2011985. This is a draft note of a meeting titled Horizon Integrity on 6th of December 2005. We've referred to Keith Baines already and Mandy Talbot, who I think you said you recognise the name, but not necessarily what she did. Do you recognise anyone else in that list?
No, no one.
You'll see, if we go to 1 and findings, it says there is no generally understood process for identifying emerging cases in which the integrity of accounting information produced by Horizon may become an issue. And there's a discussion on potential processes. And if we could turn to page 3, please. Paragraph 14 refers to Mr. Castleton's case. The Castleton Marine Drive branch case, scheduled for 7th of February, is the first of the current cases that may require expert testimony. This will not be needed on 7th February, but could be needed the next time this case is in court. Were you aware of an internal meeting like this to consider how Post Office Limited responded to Horizon integrity cases?
No.
Why?
Why should I be aware of it?
Earlier in your evidence, you referred to having ultimate executive accountability for the operations of Post Office Limited, correct?
Yes.
And do you accept that how Post Office deals with challenges to the Horizon IT system is a significant part of its executive function or its operations?
Yes.
Do you accept that a policy such as that, or a process as to how Post Office deals with those types of cases, is something over which the board should have oversight?
No.
Why not?
Because I think it's the return of, well, why don't I understand and hear and know about this particular meeting? It's highly unlikely that I would know about every meeting of some junior managers all over the country. It's as simple as that.
Well, let's rephrase the question then. Not this specific meeting. Were you aware that internally there was it was thought necessary to develop a process to respond to challenges to Horizon?
No, I wasn't. And I'd have been very interested in the fact that that existed, because it would have meant we've got problems with Horizon, which I wasn't aware of.
And why can you explain why, as Chief Executive, you weren't aware of that?
Yes, I think I can. Despite efforts to understand and realise what was going on with Horizon actually out in the field, issues of the nature that you're discussing never came to the board. And in order to come to the board, it would have to have gone through the directors or the executives. And none of those ever raised that issue with me at all.
Mr. Miller, we earlier saw a risk register which showed a challenge being made on the Horizon reliability. Why wasn't that an alarm bell in itself?
For the same reason as I answered to that question before, it was that I picked up the number 1 million and not Horizon.
Can we turn to look at prosecutions, please? No need to turn it up, but for the record, it's page 19, paragraph 65A of your statement. You say that it was unusual for a company to be directly involved in criminal prosecutions. Do you agree with that?
Definitely.
What was your understanding of Post Office's reasons for being involved in prosecutions?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Why did you believe, what did you believe was Post Office's reasons for bringing prosecutions itself?
Well, there'd be multiple reasons, but broadly because someone had offended against the post office and what they did was supposed to be illegal.
So, in respect of where the post office pursued a case for theft, fraud or false accounting against the sub-postmaster, did you believe there was a deterrent effect or it was a good deterrent to stop future alleged theft, fraud or false accounting?
No, I don't think it was anything like that. I think that that as with all of the whole of the United Kingdom, if someone is found nicking something, they try to prosecute them against it. I think it was as simple as that. I don't think there was any question about let's deter all these sub-postmasters. That's the last thing we wanted to do. We wanted to encourage them.
I think you and Mr. Stevens may be at cross purposes. I think you accept that it was unusual, in fact, maybe in your experience unique, for a company themselves to initiate a prosecution. So I think Mr. Stevens is asking you...
I'm sorry.
...why the post office was doing that as opposed, say, to involving the police.
Thank you, sir. I now understand what the question is, and I'm very grateful to you pointing it out to me. I'd never worked for an institution that was capable of prosecuting somebody in the courts in their own right. It's not something that was in my purview. I would never have dreamt of it. I would always have thought that if it'd been in the bank, our audit department may have found someone taking cash, we'd have taken them to the police and said to the police, here's a chap who's nicking. They'd have taken it to Crown Prosecution Services, said that's okay, and they'd have ended up in court. And so I had no experience whatsoever of a company taking somebody to court in their own right. And I was not aware that the post office could do that.
When did you first become aware that the post office was involved with the prosecution of sub-postmasters?
Probably as very late as November 2005, the very last knockings of my time there.
Who told you?
I don't know.
Mr. Mills, if this, as your evidence is that this was a very unusual matter.
Yes.
Would it not have come as a surprise to learn that the company you'd been chief executive of for several years was prosecuting people without you knowing?
No, I knew they were prosecuting. Sorry. I knew they were taking people to court. I didn't know that they were doing it in their own right without some sort of external independent sign-off.
Well, let's take it in stages. At an operational level, who did you think was carrying out investigations where sub-postmasters were taken to court for theft, fraud or false accounting?
The investigations team in the network.
Who did you think was responsible for deciding whether to prosecute?
I actually thought that it was Royal Mail Group's legal department.
Royal Mail Group Legal Department?
Yes.
And who did you think was responsible for conducting the prosecutions?
For conducting the prosecution? I don't know who I thought was responsible for conducting those prosecutions. I don't know. I'm sorry.
When were you first aware that Post Office Limited had any involvement in the prosecution or investigation of offences?
I don't think I was aware in the sense that you mean. I think that I entered Post Office Limited with the automatic thought that if somewhere had 17,500 branches and 65,000 staff, there would be an investigations department and a prosecuting department. I just would have thought that would have been natural because you can't have that many people without criminality.
Thank you. But probably help if we looked at some of the documents, actually. Could we please look at poll 000021483? So this is a board meeting on the 20th of August 2003. And you are listed in attendance,
Yes.
as is Tony Marsh.
Correct.
Who was Tony Marsh?
He was head of security, and I think head of security at Royal Mail Group, or reported to Royal Mail Group.
In your evidence, you say that Tony Marsh didn't report directly or indirectly to you. What do you mean by that?
Exactly what I say.
Sorry?
Exactly what I said. He didn't report to me, and I don't think he reported indirectly to me either. I think he reported to group.
We heard evidence this morning from Mr. Miller, David Miller, sorry, that he had regular meetings with Tony Marsh. Were you aware of that?
I wasn't, but I did know that Marsh reported on a dotted line to him.
So if Mr. Marsh reported on a dotted line to David Miller and David Miller reported to you, did he not report indirectly to you?
Yes.
So where you say in your witness evidence that Tony Marsh didn't report directly or indirectly to you, that's incorrect?
No, I don't think it is incorrect. I think there is a major difference between a dotted line reporting through a direct report compared to a hard line report through a direct report.
And can you explain what that major difference is?
Yes, it's called pay and rations. If Mr. Marsh reported somewhere else, the somewhere else could either sack him, could praise him, could give him more money, could give him a bonus, could tell him exactly what to do or not. In Miller's case, if he reported on a dotted line basis, in my view, Miller would have to persuade Marsh what to do. He couldn't tell him what to do.
Were you aware that Mr. Marsh, Tony Marsh, was responsible for head of security and also oversaw investigations?
Yes.
And you were aware, were you, that the investigations included investigations into sub-postmasters?
Of course.
And you said earlier in your evidence that part of your duties as a director, you would consider your obligations to sub-postmasters.
Yes.
Did you feel unable to exercise any oversight over Tony Marsh and the investigations that they were conducting into sub-postmasters?
No, I certainly didn't, because in practice, some of the oversight that one could exert was purely a matter of personality. However, this is another case where there is clear responsibility intergroup, and it's another case where that confusion of reporting lines was an important aspect of how one did or didn't manage Post Office Limited.
Did that formal reporting line actually prevent you or the board from overseeing what the investigations department were doing?
No, I don't think it did in this case.
Could we bring back up the previous document, please? Poll 0002143. And if we could turn to page 8, please. And to the bottom, please. Here it says, Tony Marsh presented the security paper to the board on behalf of David Miller. Can you recall why Mr. Marsh presented it on behalf of David Miller?
I don't recall, but I would guess that it was thought that Marsh would have had closer, hands-on knowledge of the issue that we were going to discuss.
Was there any reason why at any other board meeting the board couldn't have called Tony Marsh to present and give a paper?
No. I'm thinking now, but I'm not sure at all about this. I think that we'd started to have the idea that Marsh should report twice a year to us. But I'm sorry, I don't know that for a fact, because it was right towards the end of my tenure.
What reason was there for Tony Marsh not to report directly to the board?
There wasn't any reason for him not to report.
Why didn't you ask Tony Marsh to report to the board more often?
Two reasons, I think. I think corporate governance and the way in which the board operated was a growing thing that, remember, started from nothing and had to go to somewhere. And so perhaps we just weren't on the subject fast enough. That could be one reason. The other reason perhaps was a simple thing, that this board was way down with things that it had to deal with, and it was very hard work. So putting more on the board agenda every time would have been difficult.
Is that the case, that the board was focused on solvency and it wasn't focused on prosecutions of sub-postmasters?
It certainly had more focus on solvency than it did on prosecutions, that's for sure.
What focus did it have on prosecutions?
Not a high level.
Can you recall a time when the prosecution of sub-postmasters were discussed on the board?
No.
Why do you think that is?
I think I've just given the reasons why.
Do you think that's a failing of the board's part?
No, I don't.
Why?
Because you have to put yourself in that time. I can see why it should have done now, but it didn't then.
Can we turn to poll 201666566, please? This is an email from Tony Marsh on the 17th of October 2003 to a large number of staff. If we go to the next page, please. The attachment is Security Team Organisation V4. Dear colleague, as you will be aware from recent communications from both the Chief Executive, David Mills, and the Personnel Director, Ian Anderson, Post Office Limited must make further headcount reductions to support Royal Mail Group in its drive back to sustainable profitability. Were you and Post Office Limited responsible for the Security Department's headcount?
Of course.
Why did you then feel that there wasn't a more formal reporting line to you?
I don't think the two things are the same. I had the ability to instruct any executive to reduce their headcount without the question of reporting lines.
So you had the ability to give, is your evidence, sorry, that you had the ability to give Mr. Marsh instructions to reduce headcount?
Yes, it is. But he also, of course, could always overridden me and simply gone back to Royal Mail Group and said, he's asking me to do this. That's not fair, is it?
Could we go over the page, please? You see there's a discussion of a security team lead and I examining a number of options, and came to the conclusion that the structure could be further streamlined in the following ways. And it refers to internal and external crime functions, etc. Were you involved in the detail of changes to the security department?
No, not at all.
So looking at the time, I'm not finished, but I think we should take a 5-minute break. I appreciate that might run us over slightly, but if we could do that, I'd be grateful.
Right, of course.
I'm okay.
Sorry?
I'm okay.
You're okay?
Yes.
Okay. If we may carry on for...
Yes, please.
Yeah. In which case,
Sorry,
I will continue.
Yeah.
Please can we turn to Poll 3021485. And could we turn to page 13, please? There's an entry under human resources here. Do we take it to mean because it's human resources, this is referring to the Post Office Limited's workforce?
Yes.
And it states that the board agreed in situations where fraud had been perpetrated against the company. And pausing there, because this is in human resources, is that referring to fraud perpetrated by the workforce against the company?
I'm sorry, I don't know.
Reading the board minutes with your experience as acting as chief executive, what would your reading of them be?
I think that it's saying we better get on more quickly in making recovery against those persons within the company that have tried to defraud us.
So the workforce defrauding the company,
Yes.
and that would include sub-postmasters.
Yes.
And it says the appropriate civil orders will be used immediately. Was there and in advance of any criminal proceedings. Is that referring to the use of freezing orders?
I don't know, I'm sorry.
You can't recall the conversation on that?
No.
Do you recall if the board there would have discussed the fact that Post Office Limited were advancing criminal proceedings?
If they were in advance of criminal...
No. Would the board have discussed that Post Office Limited was advancing criminal proceedings?
No, they wouldn't have done.
Please can we turn to Poll 3021486. It's a board meeting on the 15th of December 2004, at which you're in attendance. Could I ask you please, could we turn please to page 7? I'm terribly sorry, page 6 first, please. Right at the bottom. So it's referring to the Risk and Compliance Committee. And Peter Corbett provided a short presentation to highlight the work of the newly formed Risk and Compliance Committee. Do you recall the discussion on this?
Very much so, yes. Yes, I was pleased that it was being formed.
And from your recollection, what was the Risk and Compliance Committee there to oversee?
Well, initially, all aspects of risk and compliance that were identified as being where we had a risk in the first place, and where there was any likelihood of us not being compliant with regulatory directives.
Was this, as I understand it, this was the introduction of the only subcommittee of the Post Office Limited Board, is that right?
Yes.
So this was quite a significant step in Post Office Limited's...
It's very important. It was the step of the board growing up into what it needed to be.
If we turn the page, please, to C. It says the scope of its activity included audit, compliance and legal issues. The primary aim was to ensure service and conformance elements of the business working together properly. First of Rod Ismay, Lynn Hobbs and Tony Marsh. And it says the next quarterly meeting would be held on 5th January 2005 to discuss branch control, vital few controls, audit reports, anti-money laundering measures, crime and fraud, and the work of the Group Audit Committee. Was, at this discussion, what was said about the Risk and Compliance Committee's role in respect of prosecutions made against sub-postmasters?
At this board meeting, nothing would have been said. This was a board meeting and announcing the formation of this committee, and outlining broadly what it was going to do.
That can come down, thank you. At the time, did you consider yourself the risks associated with Post Office Limited's involvement in prosecutions?
No, I didn't.
Why not?
Because I was too busy doing other things, but I should have done.
What do you think those risks were? If you were, with hindsight, what do you think the risks were?
Of pursuing prosecutions?
Yes.
Being wrong.
Do you think there were risks associated with the disclosure of documents and Post Office Limited's failure to disclose documents?
I'm sure that there were many, many risks associated with those prosecutions. Well, as we've now discovered, of course. At the time, I personally didn't identify those risks, and I wish I had done.
Was there anyone else in the... Well, let's start with Post Office Limited, who you think should have identified those risks?
I'm very surprised in a sense that the people dealing with the investigations, especially those people in group legal, had not come to terms with the idea that these things that were happening could harm us.
What things that were happening?
Well, the non-disclosure of certain facts to litigants.
Well, let's start on the Post Office Limited board. Was there anyone else you think should have identified the risks arising from the investigation and prosecution of offences against the postmasters?
I don't know. And I don't know because I'm trying to think at that time.
In practice, who was overseeing the investigation and security department, if it wasn't the board of Post Office Limited?
I can't truly tell you. I think it moved around.
Do you think that it's a failing of corporate governance that you can't tell who was responsible for the investigation of
Yes.
And who do you think is responsible for that failing?
Well, me, obviously.
So I'm conscious of time. There are, I believe, some core participant questions. Mr. Steen, is it anyone? Mr. Maloney. Mr. Steen and Mr. Maloney.
Right. Does that mean you're going to offer the floor to them, Mr. Stevens?
Yes, I should have, I should have said I'm conscious of time and will offer the floor.
Right. Then I'm sure that the 15 minutes which they normally afford themselves between them,
Yes, I'm just,
no more than about 15 minutes on this occasion.
I'm looking for, I think Mr. Maloney says 2 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes.
I can finish my question in 2 or 3 minutes.
Right. First of all, Mr. Mills, you happy to carry on for another 10 minutes?
Yes, Chair.
Fine. So off we go then.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Mills, you said your primary aim when you took over at Post Office was to, quote, keep this thing afloat, unquote. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. If you couldn't turn the business around, was there any danger that government would accept that the business could not be kept afloat in its then current form?
It seemed as if there was.
Yeah.
There was no willingness on the part of government to give ironclad guarantees to creditors for us.
And was everybody in senior management and on the board aware of that potential?
Definitely.
Horizon was utterly integral to the operation of Post Office at this time, wasn't it?
Crucial.
Business critical might be another description for it as well.
Definitely.
And in reality, and I don't seek to in any way challenge that what you knew and didn't know and what you've said about that. Do you understand me, Mr. Mills?
Yes.
In reality, at that time, having spent many, many millions of pounds on the Horizon system, if Post Office had been forced to go back to the drawing board on its online accounting system, the business was in real trouble, wasn't it?
I'm sorry, could you
The business was in real trouble.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Crisis mode it would have been in.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Mills.
Okay.
Mr. Mills, I've got just a couple of questions in relation to your knowledge at the time. You've stressed to Mr. Stevens in answers to his questions that you tried to work out what you knew at the time, okay? I'm going to take you to a document which is RLIT 40195. Thank you. Now, Mr. Mills, you should be able to see that we've got a photograph of you.
Yes, dreadful.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
We can see that this is an article that goes back some time. In the copy I have, which I hope you'll take from me, is dated March 2005. This is an article from the Sub-Postmaster magazine. Okay.
Yes,
All right.
I remember it well.
Okay. So here what we've got is this. We see the heading, which is improvements to the Post Office Horizon network. And you're saying at the beginning of the article, in August last year, I promised to respond to issues you raised about the reliability of the Post Office Horizon banking services. All right, so that's what you're doing.
Yes.
So putting this together, we can see at this time that you are trying to set out some reassurance to the branches regarding the operation of the Horizon system. Is that a fair description of what you're doing in this article?
Yes, and
Okay.
I was also trying to prove accountability, that what I said I'd do.
Right. So can we then look at the third column going across?
Yes.
You see the one that starts in reality, and I'll read that out. In reality, Horizon provides a reliable service from the majority of our branches most of the time, about 99.7% of the time, in fact. Having said that, I know that if your branch is affected by a loss of service, it is still significant, and since August we've been working with our suppliers to find ways of improving the overall level of service while keeping our technology costs under control. Okay, you see that?
Yes.
All right. So, so you understood at this time, in March of 2005, that there had been issues raised concerning the reliability of the Horizon system. Is that correct?
I certainly did,
right.
Yes.
Were you aware at this time, in March 2005, that Horizon data was being used to support prosecutions of sub-postmasters?
No, I was not.
Right. Now, let's go a little bit further down on the second column. I don't want to miss out anything you find important. You'll see there are 2 bullet points that refer to the faster resolution of BT faults. Okay? Now, the first one refers to post office-owned telephone lines, and then it goes on to the second bullet point. I'll take my glasses off because my copy is very small and better on the screen.
It's bad, isn't it?
Yeah. Working with our suppliers, we have identified a number of improvements in the way we manage network faults, which, combined with the improved BT service level, will result in faster problem resolution for the majority of problems. We'll know how much faster when we finish reviewing and modifying our existing fault handling processes with our suppliers. All right. So March 2005, were you aware that there was a 4-line system of support for faults within the Horizon system operated by Fujitsu?
No, I wasn't.
Okay. Now, how, therefore, when writing this article, what were you referring to as regards the management of network faults that you refer to within this article?
An amazing number of the faults that sub-postmasters were recording were, first of all, because they had bad telephone lines that didn't stay up all the time and that hiccuped. And to get them fixed, you actually needed a man in a van and a shovel. And men in vans and shovels don't turn up just like that. You have to put your hand up and say to BT, would you please come? And in 3 days' time, hopefully they turn up. So the getting our hands around BT's neck and trying to rig it was part of the problem. Also, the kit that was put into post offices, was not one piece of kit. It was a connection of pieces of kit. And pieces of kit don't always work, and the connections don't always work. And sub-postmasters pull them out, and they don't know where to put them back in. There was a whole variety of things that were nothing whatsoever to do with the software. These were real, practical, day-to-day hardware problems that we weren't getting to fast enough because we had 17,500 branches that were phoning up and we had to get round to. So I was referring to a lot of that hardware solution and not actually software solutions, because very often it was the hardware that was wrong.
Right. So if we put this together, what we've got is you setting out in an article improvements that are going to be considered for the Horizon network. You're referring to difficulties with the BT line, yes?
Yes.
You're referring to improvement with the BT service level in the second of the 2 bullet points.
Yes.
And you're also managing network faults. And there you think you're referring to hardware problems.
Potentially, yes.
Yes. Now, at the time when this article is being written, where do you get the information from so that you could write this and actually give out this reassurance?
Well, it was just something that was so well known that it wasn't something I had to go around and find out. Remember, I'm going around talking to sub-postmasters like very, very, very regularly. I mean, we talked to thousands of sub-postmasters in any one year on a regular basis. All of the executive team did that. We had regular, multiple meetings with sub-postmasters, so they just tell us.
So your system of finding out the contents for this article for the Sub-Postmaster magazine is or having a natter with a few people when you're wandering around doing your job. Is that about right?
No, I certainly didn't say that.
Well, that seems to be what you're saying. So let's try and pin it down.
No, it wasn't.
Did you
what I
speak
was
to the IT team, Mr. Mills?
Did I speak to the
Yeah.
IT? The man who ran IT reported to me on a very regular basis. I had all of the executive team reporting to me at 9 o'clock every Monday morning. We had regular conversations in the diary with the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters. We talked to the CWU regularly. These are not things that tittle-tattle that we were dodging in and out about. These are major presentations and conversations with them.
Right.
We put all of them together in a conference.
Did you speak to the IT team so that you understood that what you were putting in an article reassuring branches about the network system of Horizon was correct? Did you speak to them? Did you get a report from them? Did you get advice from them in writing so that you can understand whether there were or not faults within the Horizon system?
No, on a normal basis of every corporate organisation, had regular and direct conversations with my IT director, who had delegated authority to run the IT team.
I see. Now, you've been asked a number of questions by Mr. Stevens in relation to the coin report, and you've explained to the inquiry that you don't remember. You're either saying you haven't seen it, or you're saying you don't remember having read it before giving evidence today. Is that right? Which? Don't remember it, or haven't seen it?
Well, I don't remember it.
All right.
But I'm sorry, but to be correct, all of the information that the inquiry has sent me, I've read.
Okay. Now, you know enough about the coin report to know that it merited a point in a risk register to say that there were some difficulties with the Horizon system.
Correct.
What you've generally said is, well, £1 million was a lot of money, and therefore that probably was the thing you put in your notebook. Yeah?
Yes, I wasn't quite as flippant as that, but yes, that's what I'm saying.
All right. Now, when you were getting the information you needed for this particular article in the Sub-Postmaster magazine to reassure branches about the Horizon system, did any of the regular IT chats that you had with your IT people tell you, well, hang on, we've also had this coin report that says that there are a number of things going wrong with the system?
No. If I was going to put something out like this to the network, it would almost certainly have been copied to every director by the communications team for their comments. They would have come back, been incorporated by the communications team. I'd have re-looked at it and said, yep, that's okay, let it go.
And had you been told by any of the people in the IT team within Pol that one of the problems identified in the coin report is that when someone phones the helpline, they get told to switch off the machine, and then that doesn't really help solve software problems? You been told that at any stage, Mr. Mills?
No. If
Right.
you mean had I been told that they were asked to reboot the machine, yes.
Right. And were you told that by doing so, that can mask problems within the software of a Horizon system?
Definitely not.
Right. Okay. So let's pull this all together. It doesn't seem from your evidence, Mr. Mills, that you were told about the coin report and the significance of it. Is that correct?
Correct.
When you come to write an article for the Sub-Postmaster magazine, it doesn't seem from your evidence that that therefore achieved a note in what you were then explaining to the Sub-Postmasters. Is that also correct?
Correct.
I see. Whose fault was that? Yours or other people within Pol?
I don't think it was anybody's fault.
You don't regard problems with the helpline, where people have been told to turn it off and then turn it back on again, causing software problems. You don't regard that as being an issue that perhaps you should have been aware of, Mr. Mills?
I said I was aware of the helpline asking sub-postmasters to reboot the machine.
Did you, let's try and take that on then, did you perhaps say to anybody that if these sub-postmasters are being told to reboot, does that cause any issues? Did you raise that as a query, Mr. Mills?
I raise many queries about Horizon on a daily basis. The fact that they were asking people to reboot something
would have been trivial in my daily life. Everyone was rebooting machines everywhere for every reason. They just used that as a solution to a problem. So no, that wouldn't have caused great issues in my mind. Of much more importance was, how did we replace this system in 5 years' time?
More important than the prosecution of small businesses, more important than the people that are in branches going to prison, more important than people losing their livelihoods, Mr. Mills?
I didn't say that. You said that.
Well, what do you say now? Which is more important? What I've just said, which is people's lives being devastated and destroyed, or what you've said, which is, well, we had to keep an eye on the bottom line? Which was more important to you now, Mr. Mills?
First of all, I didn't say, well, we have to keep an eye on the bottom line. And secondly, obviously, the devastation to the lives of these poor postmasters was more important than anything else and should never, ever have happened.
Right, thank you, Mr. Steen. Just following on from that, really, Mr. Mills, I'm not for a minute going to suggest that rescuing the Royal Mail Group and or the Post Office from insolvency was not critically important. I follow that, all right? But exercising the function of prosecuting people has various consequences, and reduced to its simplest, it means that you take people to court and that in certain circumstances, very severe sanctions are imposed upon them. And it does seem to me, I have to say, that that is something which the board of directors of a major company should have very much towards the forefront of its mind, regardless of what other problems it faces. Is that fair?
Yes.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming to give evidence after making a witness statement. I'm grateful for your participation in the inquiry.
Thank you.
And so we'll adjourn now until tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock.
Yes, sir. We have John Longman, who is a adjourned Phase 4 witness, and Alan Layton.
And is Mr. Longman in person or remotely, Mr. Stevens?
I believe it's remote, sir.
Yeah, that's what I thought, yeah. All right, then, 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.